It began as a whisper in the corridors of Imperial Japan's naval headquarters. A plan so ambitious, so secret, that even most Japanese officers didn't know it existed. They weren't just building a ship. They were creating a legend. Codenamed Project A-140, this would become the largest, most powerful battleship ever conceived by mankind. 64,000 tons of steel. 863 feet long. 9 18.1-inch guns, each barrel so large a man could crawl inside it. This was the Yamato. But here's what makes this story extraordinary from the very beginning. The Yamato was built in complete secrecy. The shipyard was covered with camouflage. Workers were forbidden from speaking about it. Why such extreme measures? Because Japan knew they couldn't win a numbers game against America. So they chose a different strategy: build fewer ships, but make each one a monster. This was the decisive battle doctrine. Japan believed that when the inevitable war came, they would lure the American fleet into one massive battle. And there, the Yamato would destroy them all. One ship to decide the fate of nations. One weapon to change the course of history. On December 16, 1941, just 9 days after Pearl Harbor, the Yamato was finally commissioned. It was a masterpiece of engineering. A work of art in steel. But as the Yamato sailed out for the first time, celebrating its power, the world of naval warfare was already changing. While Japan invested everything in this king of battleships, a new king was rising, the aircraft carrier. The Yamato was born into a world that no longer existed. And that would be its fatal flaw. So the Yamato sailed, a floating symbol of immense power that felt no need to prove itself. For years, it became a ghost. While battles raged across the Pacific, this mightiest of warships spent its days anchored in remote harbors or conducting training exercises far from danger. Sailors began to whisper a new name for it: the Hotel Yamato. A luxurious, heavily armored hotel that consumed precious fuel and resources, but saw no combat. Why? Because Japan's high command was trapped by their own masterpiece. They had invested so much national pride, so much resource, and so much of their naval doctrine into this one ship, that the thought of losing it became paralyzing. The weapon built to win the decisive battle was considered too precious to actually risk in battle. It was a paradox of power, so formidable it became useless. This hesitation revealed the Yamato's first critical flaw: it was a weapon without a clear target. Naval warfare had transformed. Battles were no longer decided by giant guns dueling at 20 miles, but by swarms of aircraft striking from 200 miles away. The American strategy was simple: avoid the Yamato's terrifying guns entirely. Why fight the dragon when you could slay it from the sky? And then, in 1944, the call finally came. The largest naval battle in history was unfolding at Leyte Gulf. The Yamato was ordered to charge into the fray and destroy the American invasion fleet. This was its moment, the very purpose of its existence. But something shocking happened. As the Yamato and its fleet steamed toward the American transports, they encountered a small group of escort carriers and destroyers, a fraction of their strength. Instead of unleashing its legendary firepower and crushing them, the Japanese admiral made a fateful decision. He received a report, a mistaken report, that he was facing the main American fleet. And he ordered a retreat. The mighty Yamato, the unsinkable castle, turned its back on a fight it could have won. That retreat was more damaging than any enemy shell. It shattered the myth. It proved that the men commanding this giant were afraid to use it. The morale of the crew, once sky-high, plummeted. Their invincible ship had fled from a weaker enemy. The psychological blow was fatal. The Yamato returned to port, not as a hero, but as a reminder of a failed strategy. Japan was now losing the war catastrophically. Their empire was shrinking, their navy was in tatters, and the Americans were closing in on the homeland itself. The Yamato, once the hope of the nation, was now a constant, silent question: what do you do with a supreme weapon that has no place left in the war? The answer would come soon. And it would be a suicide mission. By April 1945, the war was lost. Japan was cornered. American forces had landed on Okinawa, an island just 340 miles from the Japanese mainland. This was the final defensive barrier. If Okinawa fell, nothing would stop an invasion of Japan itself. In this atmosphere of despair, a desperate plan was formed. It was called Operation Tengo. And at its center was the Yamato. The orders were simple, and they were final. The Yamato would sail to Okinawa with only enough fuel for a one-way journey. It would fight its way to the island's coast, beach itself on the shore, and become an immovable, unsinkable fortress. Its massive guns would blast the American invaders until it ran out of shells. Then, the 3,332 sailors and officers on board would disembark, join the infantry on land, and fight to the death with rifles. It was not a military mission. It was a ritual suicide. A symbolic sacrifice. The Japanese high command knew they could not win. But they wanted the Yamato to die an honorable death. To become a legend that would inspire the nation in its final hours. On April 6, 1945, the Yamato left its harbor for the last time. There were no grand farewells from the fleet. Only a handful of ships accompanied it, a small destroyer screen, no air cover. Above them, the skies belonged to American planes. The sailors knew the truth. As they boarded, many had already held their own funeral ceremonies. They wrote final letters, gave away personal belongings, and prepared to meet their gods. For the first day, they sailed in tense silence. Every man on board was waiting for the inevitable. They knew American submarines were watching. They knew scout planes had spotted them. They were not sailing to a battle, they were sailing into a trap. The next morning, the sky turned dark. But not with clouds. With American warplanes. The first wave of attackers, over 400 aircraft from the U.S. Task Force 58, swarmed the horizon. Fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers descended upon the lone giant. At 12:32 p.m., the first torpedo struck the Yamato's port side. The great ship shuddered. Then came the bombs. Explosion after explosion rocked the deck. The American pilots had a clear strategy: hammer the port side with torpedoes to cause a fatal list, then drop bombs to cripple the superstructure and guns. For 2 hours, the Yamato endured a storm of steel and fire. It was hit by at least 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs. Its anti-aircraft guns fired desperately, filling the sky with black smoke, but it was useless. The ship began to list violently to port, its deck tilting into the sea. Inside, the crew fought a hopeless battle against flooding. Water rushed into the shattered hull. The great ship, designed to withstand incredible punishment, was being torn apart. The order was finally given: abandon ship. But for most, it was too late. At 2:23 p.m., as the list passed 90 degrees, a catastrophic internal explosion, likely the forward main magazine detonating, ripped the Yamato in two. A fireball rose over 4 miles into the sky, visible from distant Okinawa. In minutes, the world's greatest battleship vanished beneath the waves, taking the vast majority of its crew with it. Of the 3,332 men aboard, only 269 were rescued. The Yamato was gone. It had fired its mammoth guns at enemy ships only once in its career, and now it was dead, without ever achieving the decisive victory it was built for. The Yamato sank into the deep, but its story did not end there. It left something far more important than wreckage on the ocean floor. It left a warning for every nation, for every generation, about the true nature of power. The first lesson is the most brutal: technology is meaningless without the right strategy. The Yamato was a technological marvel, the peak of battleship engineering. But it was built for a war that had already ended. While Japan was perfecting its giant guns, America was perfecting a new system of warfare: carrier groups, naval air power, and industrial production on a scale Japan couldn't imagine. You can have the best weapon in the world, but if you're fighting yesterday's war, you will lose. The second lesson is about the danger of symbols. Japan didn't just build a battleship, they built a myth. The Yamato became so important as a symbol of national pride that it became unusable as a weapon. They were afraid to risk it, to adapt it, to let it be what it was meant to be: a tool of war. When a symbol becomes more important than its practical purpose, it turns into a burden. A 64,000-ton burden. But the third, and perhaps deepest lesson, is about the human cost of arrogance. The Yamato's final mission was not designed to win. It was designed to die beautifully. The leadership sacrificed 3,000 young men not for a strategic goal, but for an idea, the idea of honor in death. This is the ultimate tragedy. When leaders become disconnected from reality, when they care more about legacy than lives, real people pay the price. Those 3,000 sailors weren't just crew, they were sons, brothers, fathers. Their lives were lost not to save Japan, but to satisfy an idea of how Japan should fall. Today, the Yamato lies broken in the darkness, over 1,000 feet below the surface. It is a ghost. A monument to a different time. But when we look at its story, we shouldn't just see a sunken ship. We should see a mirror. We should ask ourselves, what are our modern Yamatas? What powerful technologies, what proud symbols, what unchallenged ideas are we clinging to that the world has already moved past? Where are we investing our resources, our people, our pride into things that look powerful but are fundamentally obsolete? The Yamato teaches us that true strength isn't about being the biggest or the most fearsome. True strength is about perception. It's about seeing the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. It's about having the courage to change before change is forced upon you. The mightiest battleship in history failed because its creators looked backward while the world moved forward. That is a lesson that will never sink.